Okay, and we are good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to another Ask Casa session, whether you are here live or watching over later. I'm very excited. This afternoon, we have one of our great partners that we have really started working on maintaining a relationship with within these past few months. And we thought that this Ask Casa session would be a great opportunity for her to come on and explain their services and how you guys as advocates can just keep the service in mind and possibly utilize their support on your cases currently or, anytime in the future. So I am going to introduce and then hand it over to Hannah. She is with us today. She is the founder and the executive director of TriTogether, and they provide tutoring services that are all virtual for youth who are in foster care all over Massachusetts. So thank you so much, Hannah, for all that you do and for just spending some time with us today. And I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, and hello everyone watching later. I'm gonna do the scary thing of sharing my screen and see if it works. Let's see. All right, are we good?
We are good.
Okay, I can't see anyone, so call it out if you need anything. All right, hi, my name is Hannah Sieber. I am the founder and executive director of TriTogether. Thank you again for having me. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit that provides free virtual tutoring for youth in foster care, as well as adopted out of foster care and in kinship care all around Massachusetts. We're an entirely free service, and we are also entirely run by volunteers. So our team includes me, the executive director. We have a head of programming, a head of fundraising, and a head of marketing, as well as some awesome volunteers who are our tutors. So just to kind of give the backstory, because it's a little weird, I have been tutoring for a bazillion years and was a teacher for 3 years when I graduated, and I did not like teaching. Tutoring, you're always on that student's team. You're always able to personalize everything to them and stop whenever they need you to and kind of take a step back. And in teaching, I had, I think, 220 students in a school year. So you just don't have that opportunity. And I didn't love that. So I actually started a for-profit tutoring company when I left teaching because I didn't want to leave education behind. I became a software engineer, which is what I do now for my day job. And I was raised with philanthropy being like top priority, but I don't have millions of dollars to just like generously donate around the world. So I thought to myself, like, what can I do for people? And I met Mary, who runs the Gifted Crate. And if you've never heard of them, you should look them up. They provide things like birthday presents for children in foster care. And she inspired me to find TriTogether, and to kind of take these skills I had learned from creating a company, from tutoring, from training tutors, and all of that, to create a nonprofit that could do that for what we started as is just youth in DCF foster care. So that was founded in December 2021. So keeping in mind, my world revolves around school years, right? Because we're tutoring. So that was like halfway through the school year. And we continued on as a very, very small group. I did not have the head of programming, head of fundraising, and head of marketing. It was just me. On an average year, probably we had like 4 or 5 volunteers and 4 or 5 students. It was basic, it was a side passion project. I was not paid for it or anything like that. I had a new job, and now I have a 2.5-year-old. So it's been a thing on the side for me. And at the end of last school year, I said to my wife, I was like, you know what? I think it might be done. I think it might have reached the point where this is its potential, and its potential isn't really like having a big enough reach to financially make sense. For what we're spending, maybe we could just pay for tutoring for a few kids. And my wife, ever so motivational, was like, yeah, but you are helping people, and if you give it more love, it's going to grow. So the big decision of summer 2025 was, let's just do this right. So
And I'm sorry to butt in,
yeah.
but your volume started off good, and as you got into it, it kind of went down.
Do you want me to talk louder? I can talk louder.
I can raise the volume on my end. I just thought it was okay up front, and then as you went into it, it kind of
Are
went
other
down.
people
But
having that problem?
I'll raise my volume. Sorry.
No, no problem. I will also talk louder. Nope. Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, I won't say it seems to be perfectly fine on my end.
Okay, cool.
I'm not sure if others are experiencing any issues.
I'll just still be super loud because it's a good thing to do. So yeah, so one of our volunteers had been volunteering long term with us and had always been just super helpful getting involved in other ways. So that is now our head of programming. One of our other volunteers had started helping with our newsletter and has a degree in media. So she's now our head of marketing. And I actually reached out through an alumni network that I'm in to get some help with fundraising, and that's now our head of fundraising. So I have these amazing 3 volunteers who got really involved, and we basically starting in, I guess, June or July of this past summer, just went hard. I think we reached out to probably like 50 to 100 different organizations, whether that be groups like CASA, who would maybe know the students who we could help, or that be local universities and alumni networks to get volunteers who could help as tutors, because if you want to raise your matches, you have to raise both populations. We also reached out to a ton of different groups for fundraising. We learned a lot about the community we were serving and worked a lot with other organizations that serve similar populations, and actually ended up changing a lot of what we do because of that. So that's kind of what brought us to today. So a few stats again. In prior years, we probably helped like 4 or 5 kids in a school year. Right now, we have 19 active matches. So those are people meeting, or those are matches. So a tutor and a student meeting weekly throughout the school year. And we have 2 more students onboarding. And I'll go through what onboarding looks like in a little bit. But one of those students has already had their intro meeting and the other is scheduling it. And just again, not every student who goes through our referrals ends up wanting a tutor or sticking it out. So just to give like a sense for where we are so far, last year, the whole school year, we got 7 referrals. And so far this year, we have 32. So a really big change. In years past, most of our students were middle and high school, just because, I guess, because of who we were reaching out to find our students. And this year, they range from 6 to 22. So a huge range. We have a lot of elementary school students this year, which is really cool. We have a few college students. And right now, our students come from 7 counties in Massachusetts. We don't collect city, we just collect county. So that was really exciting. And in that same demographic survey where we learn county and age and all of that, we also ask, have you accessed resources like TriTogether previously? And every single family who has filled out a referral form says no. Or sorry, a demographic form has said no. So it reminds us why we're here, right? It reminds us that this is not a service that's all over the place that these families already are getting, and we're just another form of it. This is a unique service that is needed. So that brings us to why. So there's a few things we're hoping to address. And again, a lot of this we learned more about over the summer working with other organizations, including CASA, to learn more about who we think we're serving. So first of all, these children in general have experienced some kind of trauma, whether it related to just the process of getting into foster care or whatever led them there. Whatever the case may be, there's trauma often involved. And there are so many resources out there to help teachers become trauma informed, but that doesn't mean every teacher is getting those resources. And again, a teacher with 220 kids, how do you become informed in every single need of every single one of your students? So one of our goals is to make sure this person who's helping the student understand what it means to be trauma informed, at least to some level, right? To give them that support. Learning, as I'm sure all of you know, and stress response are different to someone who has experienced trauma. So how can we be there for them in a way that respects that? A lot of these students have missed chunks of school. We have students who have missed years of school. We have students who have changed schools and just had small gaps when changing schools. And this leads to inconsistency in a variety of ways, but fundamentally, like in the foundational topics they're learning, right? We have students who switch to a school where they're now learning how to, read a chapter book, but they never really learned how to sound out 3-letter words because they missed that when they were switching schools. So how are they possibly going to read these chapter books? So trying to help fill in those gaps is a really big part of what we do. And then something that CASA definitely understands is the importance of consistency to be an adult in this child's life who is there every week and is very predictable, and they know what a session is going to look like, and they answer their email and they just show up. And we know how important that is. And that's something that I think I took for granted when I started TriTogether. But after talking to a bazillion people this past summer and so far this school year, that's something that I think a lot of the people making referrals are most interested in, is having this adult figure who is not a social worker and is not a therapist, but is there to support this child in a different way, in an academic way, and just get them through the school year consistently. So I basically until recently just didn't tell anyone where the name came from. It was not on purpose. I just didn't think it was important, I guess. Now we have a blog post about it. So TriTogether, the sound try does not come from like try hard. It's actually TRI, like a triangle. So for many years of tutoring, I had kind of decided there were 3 pillars of tutoring, and those were foundations, strategies, and student effort. So foundations being like what I said, if you can't sound out a 3-letter word, you probably can't read a chapter book, but also things like understanding numbers and number theory are really helpful when it gets to doing fractions and understanding multiples when you do fractions, these foundational skills. Strategies, once you have the foundation, even just learning how to learn is such a key strategy that gives kids a leg up. And more importantly, kids who never really learn how to study, how to organize themselves, these executive functioning skills just get lost, right? They can't keep up. And these are strategies you can teach and you can practice. And some kids just aren't getting that support. So that's another thing that's really important when it comes to tutoring, is filling in those gaps. And then I always used to remind parents when I had a for-profit company that I don't make any promises and I don't make any guarantees, because a third of the triangle is student effort. And if they aren't engaged and they're not coming prepared, I can't help them. Or I can only help them so much. So this is what the original TRI stood for. And then TriTogether was different. I learned immediately that TriTogether was different than just, going out there and getting paid to tutor. And while those 3 things are still completely relevant to the tutoring itself, TriTogether as an organization has 3 different pillars, and those are community, equity, and education. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on those 3, but we have a speaker series kind of similar to this once a month called Learn Together. And we bring in someone who can either speak about community, equity, or education in some way that relates to us. And that's where Learn Together came from, was stepping back, especially this past summer, and saying, why are we here? And these 3 pillars really stood out to us. So in terms of community, we really think about how can we all come together to support the student in a consistent way, right? On the email thread with the tutor and the student, there are also, foster parents, sometimes a CASA advocate, sometimes a teacher. This is not just a student and their tutor. We are a team, we are a community. How can we help? And we can't really help without that entire community. So this includes our outreach for volunteers, right? We can't exist without our volunteers. And our outreach for students. We want to make sure we're serving a diverse community of students. We've been collaborating with a ton of other organizations to build this community. There's just groups that, they put our name out there. And so the community they're serving now knows about this free resource. And that is how we can all work together. And in addition, we had never really done a lot of fundraising. And so we thought to ourselves, what kind of fundraising should we do? And we decided on community fundraising. So fundraisers with local restaurants and fundraisers with booksellers, things that bring people in and say, like, let me tell you about what we do. It's not just the dollars that we get at the end of the day that matter. Someone might want to volunteer. Someone might have an idea for us. People have taught us so much about, their experiences in foster care and things like that. And then equity. I'm sure you all know the difference between equality and equity, so we chose equity for a reason. These students, whether it's because of trauma or time off from school or just their stress response or whatever, education is not as accessible to them. When they show up at school, they are most likely experiencing something different than some of their peers. And so if they have a harder time with this, we need to provide these supports to put it on an even playing field. So one of the things that we changed this year was we went from only accepting foster care to accepting children in kinship care and who were adopted out of foster care. And this was because when we stepped back and we thought about these pillars, the child recently adopted out of foster care, their trauma did not disappear. Their gaps in their education did not disappear. And we still want to be able to catch them up and serve them in this way. And same thing with kinship care. That just because they're in kinship care instead of like DCF foster care does not mean they do not need these 3 pillars of support. And the same thing goes for just meeting our students where they are. We try to prepare our tutors as much as possible to know the student they're going to work with. And we've changed a lot this year in terms of how much information I get about the student and I can talk to the student about, so that our tutor, before they even meet the student, can really be ready for that and meet them where they are to help education become more accessible to them. And then obviously education, because that's what we do. So, we cannot help with everything. They have huge things going on in their lives in most cases. They've got a ton of adults in and out of their life. But how can we move their academics along? Like, that's our job. So one thing that we do is we're trying to provide better resources for our tutors. So for example, a tutor who has taught a student basic skills on reading doesn't necessarily have the skills to teach a student who's learning to read but missed 3 years of school. Those are just different. So how can we support this tutor and make sure they're successful so that our student can be successful? We're also sending care packages this year, so students are getting like fun school supplies. And one thing that we're doing during our student intro meeting, which I'll talk about, is setting a goal. So not just get good at math and not get an A in math, but maybe catch up on fractions so that I'm not behind next quarter. Something we can do now, something we can focus on, and something that can bring this pillar like a little bit closer to them. So probably what you care more about is how this works, how you can make a referral, all of that. So on our beautiful website, you can literally click make a referral and make a referral. Previously, it had to be a social worker who made the referral. The organizations we reached out to in the first few years that we existed were all foster care social workers. And those were the people who were putting in the referral form, and all the information I ever got about the student was from that social worker. And that is not what we do anymore. And we've grown very far from that. A CASA person, a CASA advocate could make a referral, a teacher could make a referral, a foster adoptive parent or family member could make a referral, a student could make a referral. We've had guidance counselors with permission make referrals. We don't care, as long as I might request other people's input after it, but the referral can come from anyone. I will then reach out to the person who made the referral and schedule a student intro meeting. So you can see on the right, you'll just like pick a time on my Calendly link. And I'll also request a few other things. So if they have an IEP or a 504, that's really helpful for us. If the student is in foster care and this is not the social worker making the referral, I often request just have the social worker on the email. And so you're setting up this meeting. The people who need to be there are the student and at least one person on their care team. So that could be you. The student needs to be there because this is really about them. I have changed all the questions I asked to be questions that I'm really asking the student, and this care team person is really just there to fill in the gaps. I want to learn about the student. Again, it used to be that I would get like 3 sentences from the social worker, and that's all I would have to go on to give our tutor. I mean, I learn their hobbies, but I also learn the characteristics of their favorite teachers, for example. That's my favorite question. Think about your favorite teacher. What did you like about them? What made that successful? And that's where we learn the most. What goals do you want to set? What's the hard, math is hard for you. What specific thing in math is hard for you? What classes do you want to cover? What are your favorite topics to read about if it's for reading? We pick these goals. We also try to really clearly outline our expectations. I think the reason in years past, regardless of the number of referrals we had, the number would dwindle by the end of the year was because we had students who were not super engaged. Understandable, it's extra academic support. And and then they would maybe not show up. And then I would send an email that, you have to show up. And it would be this back and forth of infinite opportunities to start showing up. And that was not fair to our tutors, who are volunteers and who are just trying to help, but can't help if the student doesn't log on to Zoom. So we're trying to set really clear expectations. And that also comes with a new reward system, because we want them to want to be there. And if it's not just because they want to learn, which is fair, let's have another system as well. So we're really clear about what we expect. And then I go over with them the next steps, so that everyone's on the same page. And again, most of these questions are for the student. Obviously, a 6-year-old answers different questions than a 15-year-old, but most of this conversation is between me and the student, and the care team person can kind of chime in as needed. After that, I'm going to send whoever's been emailing me a student agreement, which basically says I'll show up, I'll give 24 hours notice if I'm not going to show up. I understand that I have to show up or give notice. I'll be respectful. I will never ask my tutor for their phone number or anything other than this email address that they're emailing me from. That general list of things. We'll send a demographic survey, which is that same survey where we learned that none of our students had access to this type of resource. And it just helps us make sure we're serving a diverse population, and also to make sure we have a diverse set of tutors who are supporting a diverse population, because tutors also fill out a survey. And then again, if you haven't already provided it, I'll ask for the IEP or 504. And I'll say that over and over again. Most of our students are on an IEP or 504. Obviously, if they're not, you're not going to send one. But just to give you a sense, most of our students are on an IEP. I will then make a match for that student once I have all of that with one of our tutors. And that is based on the subject, like someone who's great at editing essays isn't going to teach calculus. The age. Some of the tutors I interview are like, oh, I would love to tutor a high school student. But the idea of tutoring like a 7-year-old feels like not what they are comfortable with. And some of it's the opposite. I would love to teach a kid to read, but I could never help a college student with calculus, right? There's just a difference. And then also scheduling. Scheduling can be really tough. These kids have, meetings with advocates. They have visitations. They have meetings with social workers. They hopefully have after-school activities that they love. So the last thing I want is to set them up with the perfect tutor and then find out none of their times align and they just can't ever meet. So I try to take care of at least that first scheduling step, on behalf of everyone, so that we pick a tutor for the student who can actually set up a time to meet at the same time every week for that consistency. And then we start. And usually sessions are about an hour and they happen once a week. That's the service we provide. And it totally depends. So if a student is learning to read, remember it's virtual, maybe the tutor will put a passage up, shared screen, and they'll read together or answer reading comprehensions together. Sometimes if we have a student where English isn't their first language and they're trying to just learn, we've had students who wanted to be better conversationally, they'll talk about different topics. For math, they'll usually use the built-in whiteboard on Zoom or Google Meet. Sessions all look different. Oftentimes, especially with the high schoolers, it means the student or foster parent sending a picture of the homework assignment ahead of time to the email thread so that the tutor can be prepared to go over those questions, because sometimes you're really just a homework helper. So one really important thing that I never really talk about but should is what makes our most successful matches. So one thing is that the student needs to at least sort of be on board. This does not mean they're excited. I probably wouldn't have been excited for a tutor when I was a kid, but that means they're going to be engaged. They're going to give it a shot. And that's something I try to feel out during these initial meetings is the student going to show up and going to, have eyes on the screen, do their best. And that's all we ask. And I find that some of our students who I have the biggest concerns about, the first session is a little rough, and then they like their tutor and they realize, yes, I did an extra hour of, virtual learning, but I actually got the equivalent of 3 hours of homework done. So now I'm done with my homework, right? You're actually saving time. So once we get over that first little bump, we're usually good. It's really helpful when work is provided in advance, whether that means this is what they covered in school this week, this is their worksheet, whatever it is, we're much more successful when we have a little bit of information ahead of time. We need them to have access to a laptop, and we need them on time. We need them to have their materials and ideally be set up in a quiet space. As all of you know, we would prefer an adult to be semi-present, but we don't want an adult over shoulder. We find that that's really hard for students when they're already self-conscious to have, a foster parent or social worker watching what's happening. We want them present. We want the student, safe and all of that, but we don't want them part of the tutoring session. And then again, I want a copy of the IEP or 504, and we do find students are much more successful when we have the full picture like that. And also, who are these tutors? So they come from a variety of backgrounds. We have some retired teachers. One of our first tutors, actually, like way back when, was one of my high school chemistry teachers who retired. We have majority are college students who are either interested in a future in teaching or in social work. Some of whom have personal experience in foster care, and many of whom are just really passionate about it. And then we have a few young professionals who, have their day job, but are interested in doing something more fulfilling. We even have a few young professionals who tutored for us when they were in college and have now graduated and didn't want to give that up. Tutors go through a slightly longer process. They submit an application. They have an interview. So again, similar to the intro meeting, but it's an interview. They do a 2-part online training that we've created, half of which they do before their interview and the other half of which they do after, which includes things, like implicit bias, language to use around foster care, trauma and being trauma informed, and a whole lot of other things that I'm not going to think of. They do get a background check. They sign a similar agreement to the student about being appropriate, about giving notice if you're going to cancel, all of that. They also say, I won't give a student my number. So we don't text reminders, for example. All communication is through that email thread and then on that video chat. So they, again, sign a similar agreement. And then just like the student is ready for a match, the tutor would be ready for a match, and they'd be on my list of people to pick from. You have to keep in mind, having one student who wants to onboard and having one tutor who's ready for a student doesn't necessarily mean I can make a match, because they might not be for the same subject or age group or schedule, like I said. So we really have to have a backlog of tutors if we don't want students to ever have a wait list, which is our goal. So I just had to read some of our recent testimonials because I love them. And so this is really just for me to get to enjoy them. So this is one example of creating consistency. This quote is actually from one of our tutors. My student has made pretty good progress, but I'm most proud of how much she's opened up. She's a shy kid, but recently she's been more talkative. She has a great sense of humor and lots of fun stories. I'm always happy to take a short chatting break. It helps me get to know her better and makes my lessons more personalized. And then this is also from a tutor about confidence, which is as I'm sure you all understand, the ultimate goal. When we started, I knew she knew the correct answer, but it felt like a confidence issue. In the last month, I have seen the script completely flip. I don't know if it's positive reinforcement or my efforts to tailor the readings to her areas of interest, but it's been so heartwarming to see it evolve. Being a tutor with TriTogether has increased my empathy and sincerity in accommodating others' hesitance so much. And then this is from an adoptive parent. This is actually 2 separate emails. First, we have been using TriTogether for my son and daughter for just over 1 month, and we're so happy with the results. Both kiddos have made great progress with their reading, grammar, and spelling. Hannah matched us with the perfect tutor, and the whole process was very easy to get started. We're so grateful that this is offered for our children, and cannot thank you enough. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all that you do. But the better part is that we make progress, because a few weeks later we got an email. M finally got 100 on her spelling test this week after getting 80s and 90s previously, and his reading is getting better too. Z has been crushing her spelling test too, with hundreds each of the past few weeks. We're so grateful to have found your program. And then my favorite. So this one seems smaller to me. This student had to take a class called Math Plus, which was basically part of the day they had to take an additional math class to supplement to catch them up. Tutoring has helped my daughter reach her goal of no longer needing to attend Math Plus class at school. This has freed up time in her schedule to take art and gym class. I can't say enough about how TriTogether has helped our family. And this one made me cry because I met this student and she's so passionate about so many things. And I can totally see her wanting to take an art class and thinking, wow, because I'm behind in math, I don't get to take art. Like the things these kids go through, and like just to add that on. So this made my day that she gets to do this thing she actually cares about because we caught her up. So a little more information. Here's some other things we do. We do community fundraisers. We do care packages. We're doing virtual tutor hangouts just for fun. So if you want to tutor with us, you can hang out with us too. We do these Learn Together events like I mentioned. And we have details and recordings on our website if you're ever interested. Our most recent one you can see there is about supporting students with learning disabilities. We're working on growing our social media, and we also have a blog that you are welcome to read on our website as well. And if you're interested in getting involved, you can obviously make a referral. You can attend a Learn Together. You are welcome to apply to volunteer. It's just the commitment is only an hour a week. You're welcome to come to a fundraiser if any of them are local to you. You can find those on our social media. We would love you to just share your knowledge with our team. If you have resources that you think, oh, I read this article and that would be super helpful to a tutor of a student in foster care, like please share it with me. Our goal is always to keep our tutors prepared and engaged, and that would be great. And obviously follow our social media and read our blog. And thank you. I really appreciate you having me and listening. And I'm happy to answer any questions.